What does it look like when a perfect life shatters in a single second? It looks like this. A Bel Air mansion bathed in golden sunlight. A guest list of Hollywood's elite. A husband, millionaire heir Julian Blackwood, who worships his pregnant wife. And a baby shower so perfect it feels like a fairy tale. But every fairy tale has a villain. And in this story, she isn't a dragon or a witch. She's on the other end of a phone call, and she's about to burn this entire kingdom to the ground. Stay with us as we unravel the story of a baby shower that became a battlefield. The air in the Blackwood's Bel Air estate wasn't just warm with the mid-June California sun. It was thick with the cloying sweetness of triumph. Peonies the color of a virgin's blush, flown in that morning from Holland, exploded from every conceivable surface. Their scent mingled with the delicate perfume of money old, new, and Hollywood royalty that wafted from the 200 guests mingling on the manicured lawns. This wasn't just a baby shower. It was a coronation, a celebration for Amelia Blackwood, the woman who had, by all accounts, won the ultimate prize, the unwavering devotion of Julian Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood global empire. Amelia stood near a cascading fountain, a vision in a bespoke ivory silk dress that draped elegantly over her 8-month bump. Her hand rested protectively on the curve of her stomach, a gesture both maternal and proprietary. She was beautiful, but it was a serene, almost untouchable beauty, as if she were a priceless piece of art her husband had acquired and placed in the most exquisite setting. Her smile, though constant, didn't always reach her sapphire blue eyes. She was playing a part, the part of the happiest woman in the world, and she had been playing it for so long she almost believed it herself. Julian was never far from her side. To the casual observer, he was the doting husband personified. One hand was always on the small of her back, his thumb rubbing gentle circles. He'd lean in to whisper something in her ear, his lips brushing her temple, and she would laugh, a light, tinkling sound that the guests seemed to drink in like the vintage Dom Perignon flowing from the champagne towers. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way so common among men who had never been told no. His dark hair was impeccably styled, his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit fitting his athletic frame like a second skin. "Happy, my love," he murmured, his voice a low thrum against her ear, his breath smelling of mint and power. "Beyond happy," Amelia replied, her voice smooth as cream. She tilted her head back to look at him, her gaze locking with his. "It's perfect, Julian. Everything is perfect." And it was. The decorations were a masterpiece of understated opulence, designed by the famed Preston Bailey himself. The catering, a lavish spread of delicate canapés and artisanal everything, was handled by Wolfgang Puck's private team. A string quartet played softly in the background, a gentle counterpoint to the hum of expensive gossip. Amelia had seen the invoices. The peonies alone cost more than her first car. It was all a testament to Julian's favorite mantra, "Anything for my family." Her younger sister, Chloe, navigated through a cluster of soap opera stars and tech billionaires, a plate of miniature quiches in her hand. "You look like a goddess," Chloe said, her eyes, a paler shade of blue than Amelia's, scanning the crowd with a cynicism she didn't bother to hide. "A very, very expensive goddess." Amelia's smile became a little more genuine. "Stop it. It's for the baby." "Right. The baby, who I'm sure will appreciate the thread count of these linen napkins from his uterine perch," Chloe retorted, nudging her sister playfully. "How are you holding up? All this performance art must be exhausting." "I'm fine," Amelia insisted, though her feet were beginning to swell in her Jimmy Choo flats. Julian wanted everything to be special. As if summoned, Julian reappeared, having just wrapped up a conversation with a famous director. He handed Amelia a glass of sparkling elderflower water in a crystal flute that matched his own champagne. "To us," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "To our son." They clinked glasses, a perfect portrait of domestic bliss. And in that moment, as the California sun cast a golden halo around them, it felt real. The doubts that sometimes pricked at Amelia in the dead of night, the late night, business calls, the unexplained trips, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on a suit jacket, all receded, banished by the sheer, overwhelming evidence of her perfect life. Then his phone buzzed. It was a specific buzz, a vibration pattern he had set for a single contact, not the gentle hum for his business associates or the cheerful chime for his family. This was a frantic, insistent vibration, like a trapped wasp against a window pane. Julian's smile didn't falter, but a subtle, almost imperceptible tension tightened the muscles in his jaw. His eyes, for a fraction of a second, flickered with something that looked like panic. He pulled the phone from his pocket, his movements a little too quick, a little too sharp. He glanced at the screen, and the carefully constructed mask of the doting husband slipped, just for a moment. It was a micro-expression, a flash of pure, unadulterated dread that Amelia, attuned to his every mood, caught instantly. The name on the screen wasn't one she recognized, Isabella. "I've got to take this," he said, his voice a fraction too loud, too jovial. He was already turning away, stepping behind a large potted ficus tree as if its leaves could provide a shield. "It's Richard from the London office. Time zones, you know." Amelia's heart gave a painful thud against her ribs. Richard from the London office had a cheerful chime. She knew because he had called during breakfast just yesterday. She watched him, her hand frozen mid-air as she was about to take a sip of her drink. He had his back to her, his shoulders hunched. He wasn't speaking loudly, but his posture screamed agitation. He gestured with his free hand, a sharp, cutting motion of dismissal. He paced a tight, 3-foot line, his expensive leather shoes scuffing silently on the flagstone patio. "What's wrong?" Chloe asked, following her sister's gaze. "Did his stock market crash?" Amelia didn't answer. She could feel the blood draining from her face. It was the way he held the phone, pressed tight to his ear, his body angled away from her, away from the party, as if the call was a toxic entity he was trying to contain. This was not a business call. This was something else. This was a secret. The string quartet swelled, playing a cheerful Vivaldi piece, but the music sounded jarring and thin now, a flimsy soundtrack to the sudden, gaping crack that had just appeared in the porcelain facade of her life. She saw him end the call and shove the phone back into his pocket. He stood there for a long moment, his back still to her, and she watched him take a deep, shuddering breath, his shoulders rising and falling. He was composing himself, reassembling the mask. When he turned back to her, the smile was back in place, bright and dazzling, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, distant, and filled with the shadows of a lie. "Sorry about that, my love," he said, rejoining her side and slipping his arm around her waist as if nothing had happened. International finance waits for no man, not even one at his own baby shower. Amelia looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see her husband. She saw a stranger. And a terrible, cold certainty began to bloom in her chest. Everything was not perfect. And it was never going to be perfect again. The call lasted no more than 90 seconds, but it was long enough to curdle the very atmosphere of the party. The sun seemed to lose its warmth. The scent of the peonies became funereal. The cheerful music of the quartet grated on Amelia's nerves like a rusty saw. Julian had returned to her side, his arm a leaden weight around her waist, but he was no longer present. His body was there, a handsome, smiling automaton, but his mind, his soul, was somewhere else entirely, trapped in the web of that 90-second conversation. He became a ghost at his own celebration. He laughed a little too loudly at a senator's bad joke, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the garden as if expecting an attack. He refilled Amelia's glass with a hand that was not quite steady, a tiny, almost invisible tremor that she felt as his knuckles brushed hers. He would start a sentence, lose his train of thought, and cover the lapse with a self-deprecating chuckle that sounded brittle and false. To the guests, he was still Julian Blackwood, charming and in control. To Amelia, he was a stranger wearing her husband's face. "He looks like he's seen a ghost," Chloe muttered, coming to stand beside Amelia near the dessert table, which was laden with pastel-colored macarons and a towering cake shaped like a baby's rattle. "He's just stressed," Amelia said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. She rearranged a tiny, silver-wrapped gift on a nearby table, her fingers fiddling, needing something to do. "The merger is in its final stages." "The merger?" "Amelia, please," Chloe scoffed, lowering her voice. "I've seen him handle billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. This is different. He hasn't looked you in the eye since he took that call. He's looking at you like you're a problem he needs to solve." Chloe was right. His gaze kept snagging on her, but it wasn't with adoration. It was with a strange, panicked assessment. He would look at her swollen belly, then at his watch, then back at her belly, as if calculating some terrible equation. The gift opening ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m. It was meant to be the centerpiece of the afternoon, a moment for Amelia to be showered with love and ludicrously expensive baby paraphernalia. There was a miniature Aston Martin pedal car, a cashmere baby blanket from Hermes, a first-edition set of Winnie the Pooh books that was probably worth more than a down payment on a house. As Julian guided her to the large, ornate wicker chair that served as a makeshift throne, his touch felt cold, clinical. "Ready, my love?" he asked, his smile stretched thin across his face. "I'm a little tired, Julian," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe we can do this later." She was desperate to escape, to go upstairs to the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom and force him to tell her the truth. "Nonsense," he boomed, his voice a performance for the guests who were now gathering around. "Everyone is so excited. We can't disappoint them." He was talking about the guests, but his eyes were pleading with her, begging her to maintain the charade. "Don't make a scene," they said. "Not here, not now." So she sat, a silent, smiling queen on her wicker throne, and began to open the presents. Chloe sat on a cushion at her feet, helping her with the ribbons and passing the gifts for everyone to see. With each extravagant present, Amelia felt a wave of nausea. The gifts felt like offerings, sacrifices laid at the altar of their perfect, fraudulent life. "This one's from your father," Julian said, placing a large, elegantly wrapped box in her lap. It was from Blackwood Global's CEO, a man who saw his son's marriage as another successful acquisition. Inside was a ridiculously small pinstriped suit, a miniature replica of the ones Julian and his father wore. A note read, "Welcome to the firm, grandson." Amelia forced a laugh, but the sound was hollow. Then, one of Julian's assistants, a young, nervous man named David, approached, carrying a single, medium-sized box. It was wrapped not in the party's theme of pastel blue and cream, but in a stark, glossy black paper tied with a single, blood-red ribbon. It stood out from the pile of cheerful gifts like a crow in a flock of doves. "This was just delivered by a courier, sir," David said, his eyes darting nervously towards Julian. "There's no card." "Odd," Julian said, his voice tight. He reached for the box, but Amelia was faster, her instincts, primal and screaming, took over. "I'll open it," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She had a premonition, a cold, dark certainty that this box held the answer to the dread that had been coiling in her stomach for the past hour. "Amelia, maybe we should wait," Julian began, his hand hovering over hers. "Why?" she asked, finally looking him directly in the eye. "Are you afraid of what's inside?" The challenge hung in the air between them, sharp and dangerous. The guests, sensing the sudden shift in tone, fell silent. The string quartet faltered, the last note of a Mozart piece dying with a faint screech. Julian slowly withdrew his hand, his face pale. With deliberate, measured movements, Amelia pulled at the red ribbon. It came undone with a soft hiss. She lifted the lid of the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single object. It was a baby's rattle, exquisitely crafted from sterling silver. But it wasn't the rattle itself that made the blood freeze in her veins. It was the engraving. Curled around the handle, in delicate, looping script, were 2 words, "For Daddy." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Chloe shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. But Amelia didn't look at her sister or the stunned faces of her guests. She looked at Julian. He was staring at the rattle as if it were a venomous snake. All the color had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray pallor. The suave, confident millionaire was gone, replaced by a cornered, terrified man. He looked up from the box, and his eyes met Amelia's. And in that moment, she saw it all, the guilt, the deceit, the confirmation of a betrayal so profound it stole the very air from her lungs. Her perfect life didn't just have a crack in it. It had been dynamited. She felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, the world tilting on its axis. The faces of her guests blurred into a meaningless collage of gaping mouths and wide eyes. Her hand went to her belly, a reflexive, protective gesture. And then a sharp, terrifying pain shot through her abdomen, a brutal cramp that made her cry out. "Amelia!" Chloe's voice was sharp with alarm. Amelia's vision tunneled, the edges darkening. The last thing she saw before the world went black was Julian's face, a portrait of pure, unadulterated horror. Not for her, she realized with a chilling clarity, but for himself. Panic erupted. It was a controlled, wealthy sort of panic, more a flurry of horrified whispers and averted eyes than outright screaming, but it was chaos nonetheless. The senator's wife was fanning herself with a program. The Hollywood director was already murmuring into his phone, likely to his agent, sensing a scandal that was better than any script he'd read that year. The party, a meticulously crafted illusion of perfection, had disintegrated into a tableau of public humiliation. Chloe was the first to move, her shock transmuting into pure, focused rage. She knelt by her sister's side, her voice sharp and clear. "Someone call 911. Now." David, the assistant, was already fumbling with his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. Julian remained frozen for a critical, damning second, his eyes locked on the silver rattle as if it held some hypnotic power. He was paralyzed, caught between the 2 competing disasters of his own making, the woman who carried his legitimate heir, unconscious on the ground, and the specter of the other woman, the one who had just thrown a grenade into the center of his life. "Julian, for God's sake, do something!" Chloe shrieked, her voice a roar. The shout seemed to break the spell. Julian lurched into motion, dropping to his knees beside Amelia. "Amelia, honey, can you hear me?" He touched her cheek, his hand trembling. The gesture, which hours before had seemed so tender, now looked grotesque, a mockery of the love he had so publicly professed. "Don't you touch her!" Chloe spat, slapping his hand away with surprising force. "You've done enough." The paramedics arrived with an efficiency that was both terrifying and reassuring. They moved with practiced speed, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage around them. As they assessed Amelia, fitting an oxygen mask to her face and checking her vitals, the story began to piece itself together in hushed, fragmented whispers among the guests. "Did you see his face? A gift from another woman. Engraved, it said, 'For Daddy.' The poor thing, the shock of it all." The whispers were like acid, dissolving the last vestiges of the Blackwood's carefully curated public image. Julian stood back, helpless, as they lifted his wife onto a gurney. He looked utterly lost, his Tom Ford suit seeming ill-fitting and absurd in the face of such raw, medical reality. His eyes met Chloe's over the top of the gurney, and he saw no pity there, only cold, hard contempt. "I'm coming with her," Chloe stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. She climbed into the back of the ambulance without a backward glance. Julian made to follow, but a firm hand on his arm stopped him. It was his father, Harrison Blackwood. Harrison had been holding court with a state judge and a hedge fund manager when the chaos erupted. He was a man carved from granite, his face a roadmap of ruthless business deals and boardroom battles. His silver hair was perfect, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were chips of ice. "You are not going anywhere," Harrison said, his voice low and lethal. "You are going to stay here and handle this." "Handle what?" "Dad, Amelia's." "Amelia has the best medical care money can buy," Harrison cut him off, his grip tightening. "You have a different kind of fire to put out. Your mess. Your fire." He gestured discreetly with his head towards the guests, who were now starting to leave in a steady, somber stream, their phones undoubtedly buzzing with the news. "This is a PR nightmare. The board will be apoplectic. This merger. I don't give a damn about the merger right now." Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "Then you are a bigger fool than I thought," Harrison replied, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Everything you are, everything you have, is because of this family, this company. You will not jeopardize it for some sordid little affair. You will fix this. You will release a statement. You will paint this as a malicious prank by a deranged stalker. And you will cut off whoever this Isabella is, completely and permanently. Is that understood?" Julian stared at his father, a maelstrom of panic, guilt, and a lifetime of ingrained obedience warring within him. He wanted to scream, to run, to rewind the day. But he was a Blackwood, and Blackwoods did not run. They managed. He gave a stiff, jerky nod. As the ambulance sirens faded into the distance, Julian turned to face the wreckage of his party. The string quartet had packed up. The catering staff were clearing away the untouched food with somber efficiency. And on the gift table, amidst the cheerful pastel wrapping paper, the glossy black box sat open, the silver rattle gleaming malevolently in the afternoon sun. He walked over to it and picked it up. It was heavy, solid. He thought of Isabella. Isabella Rossi, a fiery, passionate art dealer he'd met in Milan 6 months ago on a business trip. It had started, as it always did, as a casual, thrilling diversion from the quiet, predictable serenity of his life with Amelia. Isabella was everything Amelia was not: tempestuous, unpredictable, dangerously alive. He had told himself it was just a fling, a meaningless escape. He had bought her gifts, whispered lies, created an entirely separate life in the stolen hours and secret trips. He had been a fool to think he could keep the two worlds from colliding. His phone buzzed again. It was her. "Isabella." He answered, his voice a low growl. "What have you done?" Her voice, usually so sultry and playful, was sharp and cold. "What have I done?" "I did what you were too much of a coward to do, Julian. I introduced myself. I'm not some dirty little secret you can hide away in Europe. I'm carrying your child, too." The world tilted again. Julian gripped the edge of the table for support, the silver rattle falling from his hand and clattering onto the flagstones. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Isabella said, her voice laced with bitter triumph. "I'm pregnant, Julian. 12 weeks. I found out a month ago. I gave you a chance to tell her, to do the right thing. You didn't. So, I did it for you. We need to talk about our future. Our baby's future." Julian felt the last of his strength leave him. It wasn't just an affair. It was a second family, a second heir. He had not just broken his vows, he had built a cage for himself, and the doors had just slammed shut. He was trapped. Utterly and completely trapped. "I have to go," he choked out, ending the call. He looked at the fallen rattle, then at the half-dismantled party, a monument to his own spectacular failure. His father was right. This wasn't just a personal crisis. It was a bomb that threatened to detonate the entire Blackwood empire. And he, Julian Blackwood, had just lit the fuse. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital was an assault after the cloying perfume of the garden party. In the private wing of Cedars-Sinai, a wing where the rooms looked more like suites at the Four Seasons, Chloe paced the waiting area like a caged panther. The plush carpet did nothing to soothe her. The tasteful abstract art on the walls seemed to mock her with its serene detachment. Amelia had been whisked away for a battery of tests. For 2 agonizing hours, there was no news. Chloe's frantic texts to her parents had initiated a cross-country flight from Boston. Julian, to her relief, was nowhere to be seen. She hoped he was rotting in whatever hell he had created for himself. Finally, a doctor appeared. He was a kind-faced man in his late 50s with weary eyes that had seen too much. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Reeves, the head of obstetrics. "How is she? How's the baby?" Chloe demanded, her hands clenched into fists. "Your sister is stable for now," Dr. Reeves said, his voice calm and measured. "We've managed to stop the contractions. She's resting under sedation. But I have to be frank with you. The situation is precarious." "Precarious how?" Dr. Reeves sighed, gesturing for her to sit. "Amelia has a condition called placenta previa, where the placenta is covering the cervix. We've been monitoring it. It's not uncommon. But she also has a partial placental abruption, which is where the placenta has started to detach from the uterine wall. The initial event, the collapse, was likely triggered by a sudden spike in blood pressure, almost certainly caused by acute emotional distress." He paused, letting the clinical terms sink in. "The abruption is what caused the bleeding and the sharp pain she experienced. It's a serious complication. It deprives the baby of oxygen and nutrients and can cause heavy, dangerous bleeding in the mother." Chloe felt a wave of cold dread. "So, what does that mean? Will she be okay?" "It means she is now an extremely high-risk pregnancy," Dr. Reeves said, his expression grave. "She needs to be on complete bed rest for the remainder of her term. No stress. Absolutely none. Any further shock, any significant rise in her blood pressure could cause the abruption to worsen. If that happens..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "We would have to perform an emergency C-section, and at 32 weeks, the baby's chances would be complicated, and Amelia's own health would be in serious jeopardy." No stress. The words echoed in Chloe's head. How was Amelia supposed to avoid stress when her entire world had just been detonated? Just then, the doors to the private wing swished open, and Julian strode in, his father Harrison flanking him like a grim-faced bodyguard. Julian's face was a mask of strained concern, but Chloe could see the frantic energy underneath. He had changed out of his party suit into dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, an outfit designed to project somber responsibility. "How is she?" Julian asked, his voice rough. Chloe shot to her feet, her body thrumming with animosity. "You have no right to be here. You have no right to even say her name." "She is my wife," Julian stated, taking a step forward. "And you are the reason she is in this hospital bed." Chloe shot back, her voice rising. "The doctor just told me she has a placental abruption, you selfish bastard. Caused by stress. Caused by you. Your sordid little secrets could kill her and your son." The accusation, raw and public, hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He visibly flinched. Harrison stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Miss Davenport," Harrison said, his voice a smooth, placating baritone that had calmed countless hostile boardrooms. "I understand you're upset. We all are. Julian is distraught. This entire situation is the result of a cruel and malicious act by a disturbed individual." "A disturbed individual?" Chloe laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Is that what you're calling her? The woman who is also pregnant with his child?" If Harrison was shocked by this revelation, he didn't show it. His face remained an impassive mask, but his eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Julian, a silent, deadly look that promised a reckoning later. Julian, meanwhile, looked as if he was about to be sick. He hadn't known that Chloe knew. He hadn't known Isabella would be so thorough. "Let's not air these baseless accusations in a hospital corridor," Harrison said smoothly. Our only concern right now is Amelia's well-being. Then leave, Chloe said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. Your presence here is a toxin. Dr. Reeves said she needs zero stress. Seeing his face is the most stressful thing I can possibly imagine for her right now. So get out. Julian opened his mouth to protest, a desperate plea forming on his lips, but Dr. Reeves, who had been listening silently, intervened. She's right, Mr. Blackwood, the doctor said, his tone firm. In your wife's current condition, any emotional agitation is a significant medical risk. For the health of your wife and your child, I have to insist that you keep your distance for now. It was a professionally worded dismissal, but a dismissal nonetheless. Julian looked from the doctor to Chloe's unforgiving face. He was being locked out, denied access to the very crisis he had created. He was the husband, the father, the patriarch in training, yet he had been rendered utterly powerless. Defeated, he turned away, his shoulders slumped. Harrison gave Chloe a final, long look that was part appraisal, part warning before turning to follow his son. As they walked down the corridor, Chloe could hear Harrison's voice, a low, cutting murmur. A second one. Are you an idiot, or just determined to ruin this family? Chloe watched them go, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had won the battle, but she knew the war was just beginning. The Blackwoods wouldn't just retreat. They would regroup. They would strategize. They would come back with lawyers and PR teams and all the immense power their name commanded. She turned and looked at the closed door to her sister's room. Amelia was in there, sedated and unaware, her body a fragile vessel in a storm she couldn't see. And Chloe, her fierce, loving, and now terrified sister, was the only thing standing between her and the hurricane named Blackwood. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in damage control, Blackwood style. The first wave of the attack was a press release issued by Blackwood Global's formidable PR firm. It was a work of fiction so audacious it was almost admirable. The unfortunate incident at the baby shower was framed as a targeted harassment campaign by a deeply disturbed individual with a history of fabricating relationships with high-profile figures. The collapse of the beloved Mrs. Blackwood was attributed to the heat and the strain of the day. The story was crafted to evoke sympathy for the golden couple, now victims of a cruel and baseless attack. The name Isabella Rossi was never mentioned, but her specter was painted as a deranged stalker, a Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. The second wave was legal. Julian, guided by his father's iron will, was forced to sit in a sterile conference room with a team of lawyers whose hourly rates could fund a small country. They were sharks, their smiles all teeth. They laid out the strategy: file for a restraining order against Isabella, leak carefully selected evidence of her instability to friendly media outlets, and prepare for a potential paternity suit by preemptively discrediting her. Julian sat through it all in a fog of self-loathing. He signed the papers they put in front of him, his signature a weak, spidery thing. He felt like a passenger in his own life, his father firmly in the driver's seat, steering the family's billion-dollar ship away from the iceberg his son had so carelessly steered them towards. This is not about your feelings, Julian, Harrison had told him in the car on the way to the law office, his voice like chipping ice. This is about legacy. It's about the name on the building. You created a liability. We are now containing it. The woman in Italy and her potential issue will be handled, quietly and financially. But your legal, public focus must be on your wife and your legitimate son. Meanwhile, in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of the hospital, Amelia was slowly surfacing from the fog of sedation. She woke up to find Chloe sitting by her bed reading a magazine, a fierce and silent sentinel. The memories of the party came back not in a rush, but in sharp, painful shards: the black box, the red ribbon, the silver rattle, the look on Julian's face. It's true, isn't it? Amelia whispered, her voice raspy. It wasn't a question. Chloe put down the magazine and took her sister's hand. Yes, she said softly. It's true. Amelia closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her temple into her hairline. She didn't sob. She didn't scream. The betrayal was too vast, too deep for hysterics. It was a cold, hollow ache in the center of her being, a void where her trust in her husband used to be. "The baby?" she asked, her other hand instinctively going to her stomach. "The baby is okay, for now," Chloe said quickly, summarizing Dr. Reeves's diagnosis and the absolute need for bed rest. "You have to be calm, Ames. You have to think about him." Calm. It was a laughable suggestion. How could she be calm? Her marriage was a lie. Her husband was having a baby with another woman. Her entire life, a life that had been the envy of so many, was a sham. Her parents, Catherine and Robert Davenport, arrived that afternoon, their faces etched with worry. They were good, decent people, a Boston lawyer and a history professor who had always been slightly intimidated by the overwhelming wealth and power of the Blackwoods. They offered love and support, but they were out of their depth, like a dinghy caught in the wake of an ocean liner. "We'll get you the best divorce lawyer in the country," her father said, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. But the Blackwoods were already a step ahead. That evening, a floral arrangement the size of a small car was delivered to Amelia's room. The card, written in Julian's elegant script, was filled with anguish and remorse. "My dearest Amelia, there are no words to express the depth of my shame and regret. I have failed you. I have broken our sacred vows. I live every second with the knowledge that my unforgivable actions have put you and our precious son at risk. Please, please allow me to see you. Let me begin the impossible task of earning back a fraction of your trust. I love you. I have only ever truly loved you. Yours forever, Julian." It was a beautiful, heartfelt apology, and Amelia knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that he hadn't written a single word of it. It was PR, a carefully crafted message, the first move in a campaign to win her back, not for love, but for optics. The true attack came the next day. A lawyer from Julian's team, a woman with a deceptively warm smile and eyes as cold as a morgue slab, paid a visit. She wasn't there to serve papers. She was there to talk. "Amelia," she began, her name sounding like a sweet poison on her tongue. "Julian is devastated. He has ended all contact with the woman in question and is pursuing legal action to ensure she can never harm your family again." She then laid out the offer. Julian would do anything to keep his family together. He would attend therapy. He would sign a postnuptial agreement giving Amelia a staggering settlement if he ever transgressed again. They would present a united front, for the sake of the child and the family's reputation. Then came the threat, veiled in the language of concern. "Of course," the lawyer continued, her smile never wavering, "if this were to proceed to a divorce, it would be contentious. A contested custody battle would be incredibly stressful. The media scrutiny would be relentless. For a woman in your delicate condition, the toll would be immense. Dr. Reeves has been very clear about the risks of stress. The Blackwood family's primary concern, above all else, is the safe delivery of Julian's son." Amelia stared at her, her blood running cold. It was blackmail, pure and simple: stay with your cheating husband, or the stress of fighting us might kill your baby. After the lawyer left, Amelia felt a terrifying sense of claustrophobia. The walls of her luxury hospital suite seemed to be closing in. The Blackwoods were everywhere. They were in the news, on the TV, in the corner of her room, in the legal papers piling up, in the very air she breathed. They were an empire, and she was a small, broken country on their border. That night, unable to sleep, she stared out the large picture window at the glittering expanse of Los Angeles. She felt utterly alone. She had her family, yes, but they were outmatched. She was a pawn in a game played by kings and queens, and she was about to be sacrificed. She needed an ally, not just a lawyer, but someone who understood the world Julian inhabited, someone who wasn't afraid of the Blackwoods. Her mind raced, sifting through the faces from the party, the friends, the acquaintances. And then a name surfaced, a name she hadn't thought of in years, Marcos Thorne. Marcos had been Julian's best friend at Stanford, his business partner in their first tech venture. They had been inseparable, two young titans ready to conquer the world. But there had been a bitter falling out 5 years ago, a betrayal. Julian had pushed Marcos out of the company they had built together, using his family's lawyers to crush him. Julian had told her Marcos had been reckless, a liability. But now, Amelia wondered. She remembered Marcos as being brilliant, ruthless, and the only person she had ever seen stand up to Julian's father. He had since rebuilt his career, founding a rival investment firm that was now a major competitor to Blackwood Global's tech division. He hated Julian, and he wasn't afraid of a fight. With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone. It was a desperate long shot, a deal with the devil, perhaps. But as she found his number, she knew she had no other choice. She couldn't fight an empire with a slingshot. She needed a dragon of her own. The phone rang 4 times, each ring echoing the frantic, desperate beat of Amelia's heart. She was about to hang up, her courage failing her, when a deep, gravelly voice answered. Thorne. There was no warmth, just a clipped, impatient statement of fact. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Hello. Marcos Thorne's voice sharpened. Who is this? Marcos, she began, her own voice a fragile whisper. It's Amelia. Amelia Blackwood. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. She could picture him perfectly, leaning back in a leather chair in some starkly modern, high-tech office overlooking a city skyline, his brow furrowed, his mind instantly calculating a dozen different angles. Amelia, he finally said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. This is a surprise. To what do I owe the honor? Has your husband finally decided to sell his soul back to me? The venom in his tone was undisguised. No, Amelia said, forcing herself to be brave. I might need your help. Another pause, this one longer, more considered. My help, he said, drawing the words out. Why in God's name would I help the wife of Julian Blackwood? Because you hate him, Amelia said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Because he betrayed you, and now he's betrayed me, and I have no one else to turn to. She told him everything, the baby shower, the rattle, the other woman, the pregnancy, the hospital, the lawyers, the veiled threats. She laid the entire sordid mess at his feet, her voice breaking with a mixture of shame and desperation. She wasn't the serene, untouchable goddess from the party anymore. She was just a woman, terrified and trapped, making a final, desperate plea. When she finished, the silence on the line was profound. She thought he might have hung up. Where are you? He asked finally, his voice devoid of its earlier sarcasm. It was all business. Cedar Sinai. The East Wing. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything, he commanded. I'll be there in an hour. The line went dead. Amelia sank back against her pillows, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of hope. She had just invited the wolf into the sheep pen. But right now, the wolf felt safer than the shepherd. Meanwhile, in a darkened corner of a chic Italian restaurant in Milan, Isabella Rossi stared at her phone, her knuckles white as she gripped it. The Blackwood PR machine had reached across the Atlantic. Her name was being dragged through the mud in the European press. Anonymous sources were painting her as an unstable, gold-digging fantasist. The restraining order, filed in a California court, had been served to her via email. She was being erased, delegitimized, cast as the villain in a story where she saw herself as a victim. Isabella was no fool. She was the daughter of a notoriously cunning Florentine art dealer who had taught her that in life, as in art, provenance and perception were everything. She had known Julian was married. She hadn't cared. She had seen the sadness in his eyes, the hollowness behind his perfect smile, and had mistaken it for a void only she could fill. She had fallen for the fantasy he sold her, a life of passion and authenticity, away from the sterile obligations of his American dynasty. The pregnancy had changed the game. It had made their affair real, tangible. It had given her leverage. But she had underestimated the sheer, brutal power of the Blackwood machine. They weren't just ending the affair, they were trying to annihilate her very credibility. She looked down at her own, barely there bump hidden beneath a stylish silk blouse. This was not just her child. This was a Blackwood child. It had a claim, a birthright. She would not be silenced or bought off with a quiet settlement. She wanted recognition. She wanted Julian. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number with a U.S. country code. She answered cautiously. Isabella Rossi. The voice was female, American, with a crisp, professional edge. My name is Naomi Vance. I'm an attorney. I represent a client who has a vested interest in the Blackwood family. I believe our interests may be aligned. I already have a lawyer, Isabella said coolly. Does your lawyer have experience with international paternity claims against a multi-billion-dollar corporation? The woman countered smoothly. Does your lawyer know that Harrison Blackwood is currently trying to leverage a morality clause to oust his own son from the company and install a more stable leadership before the upcoming merger? My client does. And my client is prepared to fund your legal battle, completely and discreetly. All we ask for in return is information. Anything you have: emails, texts, photos, travel itineraries, anything that proves your relationship with Julian was not a fantasy, but a long-term, intimate affair. Isabella's mind raced. Who was this mysterious client? A rival company trying to sabotage the merger? A disgruntled Blackwood board member? It didn't matter. An enemy of her enemy. I'm listening, Isabella said. An hour later, Marcos Thorne walked into Amelia's hospital room. He was even more imposing than she remembered, taller, broader, with a restless, predatory energy that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit, but he wore it like armor, not for decoration. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in every detail before they settled on her. He didn't offer pleasantries. He pulled a chair to her bedside. Tell me again, he said. From the beginning. Every detail, no matter how small. For the next 2 hours, Amelia talked, and Marcos listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her with an unnerving intensity, his mind working, processing, connecting dots she couldn't even see. He was building a case, not just a legal one, but a strategic one. When she was done, he sat back, his expression grim. They're boxing you in, he said, his voice a low rumble. The postnup is a trap. It keeps you tied to him, under his control. The stress argument is their checkmate. They know a court battle could endanger the baby, and they're using your own child as a weapon against you. It's brilliant and utterly despicable. So, what do I do? Amelia asked, her voice trembling. First, we get you out of here, Marcos said. Not to your parents' house, not to a hotel. Somewhere secure, somewhere the Blackwoods can't get to you. I have a place. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Second, we stop playing defense. We go on the offensive. Julian's affair isn't just a moral failing, it's a breach of his fiduciary duty. He used the company jet for his trysts. He bought that woman expensive gifts, likely disguised as corporate expenses. He exposed the company to scandal on the eve of the biggest merger in its history. Harrison isn't just angry as a father. He's terrified as a CEO. He saw the fear and confusion in her eyes and softened his tone slightly. Amelia, your husband and his father think you are a pawn in their game. It's time to show them you're the queen. He stood up, pulling out his phone. I'm making 2 calls. The first is to my security team. They'll arrange your transfer. The second is to my lawyer. She's going to love this. Amelia watched him, a strange sense of calm settling over her for the first time in days. Marcos Thorne was a dangerous man, but his danger was now aimed away from her, pointed directly at the heart of the Blackwood Empire. The war had a new general, and the board was about to be reset. The new ending. The weeks that followed were not a blur, but a series of calculated, precise moves on a high-stakes chessboard. Amelia, whisked away in the dead of night to a stunning, secure Malibu beachfront property owned by Marcos, began to heal. Surrounded by the calming sounds of the Pacific and tended to by a private medical team, she focused on one thing, the health of her unborn son. While she found her strength, Marcos's lawyer, the formidable Naomi Vance, unleashed a storm upon the Blackwoods. A countersuit was filed, not for divorce, but for corporate malfeasance. Flight logs, credit card statements, and wire transfers painstakingly acquired by Marcos's investigators and corroborated by a now well-funded Isabella Rossi proved Julian had used millions in company assets to fund his affair. The slow, strategic leak of this information to financial journalists began to poison the Blackwood global merger, making potential partners deeply uneasy. Julian, barred from seeing Amelia and hounded by a furious Harrison, began to unravel. Harrison fought desperately to control the damage, offering Amelia a staggering private settlement, which, on Marcos's advice, she refused. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle. The true climax came 2 weeks before her due date when Amelia went into early labor. After a tense but successful emergency C-section, William Davenport Blackwood was born small, but perfect and healthy. As Amelia held him for the first time, a wave of fierce, protective love washed over her, so powerful it erased everything else. This tiny, fragile boy was her entire world now. 2 days later, the final confrontation occurred, not in a boardroom, but in the quiet of her hospital room. Julian appeared at her door, looking pale and desperate, his expensive clothes hanging off his frame. "Amelia," he pleaded, "I just want to see him. To see our son." Before Amelia could respond, a new figure appeared in the doorway behind him. It was Isabella Rossi, her own pregnancy now showing, flanked by Naomi Vance. "Our son, you mean?" Isabella's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like glass. "Or should we say sons?" Naomi Vance stepped forward, her expression neutral. She handed a file not to Julian, but to Amelia's sister, Chloe, who stood guard by the bed. "The court-ordered DNA test results," Naomi announced to the room. "They confirm with 99.9% certainty that Julian Blackwood is the father of Ms. Rossi's unborn child. The final, undeniable proof." Julian stared from the papers in Chloe's hand to Amelia, who held their son close, her face a mask of cold, calm indifference. "Amelia, I can fix this," he stammered, his voice breaking. "We can fix this." Amelia looked at the weak, broken man before her and felt nothing but a distant pity. The fire of her rage had burned out, leaving behind the cool certainty of her next move. "There is no we, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm as steel. "There is only me and my son, William Davenport." She paused, letting the words sink in. "He'll be taking my name." She delivered the final, devastating blow. "You should go. Your father is waiting. I believe the board has convened an emergency meeting to vote on your future. And the merger. His family. His company. His legacy. All of it, gone, because he couldn't keep a secret." Julian stared at the infant in Amelia's arms, the son he would never truly know. He turned and stumbled from the room, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. The war was over. In the quiet that followed, Isabella met Amelia's gaze across the room. There was no animosity, only a silent, complex understanding between two women who had been bound by the betrayals of one man. As Amelia looked down at her beautiful baby boy, safe in her arms, she knew she hadn't just one. A shattered marriage, a billion-dollar affair, a life torn apart, these were the pieces of her past. But for Amelia Davenport, this was not an ending. It was a new beginning. She hadn't just survived the storm. She had learned to command the thunder. What do you think? Was this justice, or just the beginning of a new war for the Blackwoods? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were hooked by this story of love, lies, and high-stakes revenge, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves drama, and subscribe to our channel for more tales that prove the truth is always more shocking than fiction.